At dinner, my mom announced, "Your sister's moving into your place. She needs space, and you owe family." My sister just smirked. "Try not to touch my stuff." I just smiled. They had no clue I'd moved out last week and severed the lease in my name. I, 29M, sat at the familiar dinner table, watching my mother's lips move as she delivered what she clearly thought was devastating news. She announced that my sister would be moving into my apartment because she needed space, and apparently, I owed the family this favor. My sister, sitting across from me with that insufferable smirk she'd perfected over the years, chimed in with her usual condescending tone, telling me not to touch her stuff when she moved in. I just smiled. They had absolutely no idea that I'd moved out of that apartment exactly 1 week ago and had the lease transferred out of my name 3 days before that. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Let me back up a bit. My family has always operated under the assumption that I'm their personal safety net. Growing up, I was the responsible one, straight A's, part-time job since I was 16, full scholarship to college. My sister, 2 years younger, was the golden child who could do no wrong despite constantly making terrible decisions. She dropped out of college twice, had 3 different career changes in 2 years, and had a habit of burning bridges with roommates faster than most people change their sheets. 6 months ago, she'd gotten evicted from her last place for throwing parties and disturbing neighbors. Mom had suggested she stay with me temporarily. That temporary arrangement had stretched into 6 months of pure hell. She'd brought random people over at all hours, eaten my food, used my streaming accounts, and generally treated my place like her personal hotel. Every time I tried to set boundaries, Mom would call me selfish and remind me about family obligations. The final straw came 3 weeks ago when I found out she'd been telling people she lived there and had even given my address to some sketchy guy she was dating. He'd shown up at 2 in the morning, drunk and demanding to see her. When I told him she wasn't there, he'd gotten aggressive and started banging on my door. That night, I realized I was done being the family doormat. I'd been quietly apartment hunting for months, just in case. When I found a perfect 1-bedroom place across town, I jumped on it. The landlord was understanding when I explained my situation, and we worked out a quick transfer of my old lease to avoid any complications. I'd been methodically moving my belongings out while my sister was at her part-time job, storing everything at my friend's place temporarily. The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. My sister rarely paid attention to anything that wasn't directly related to her immediate needs. She hadn't noticed that my gaming setup had disappeared or that my bookshelf was slowly emptying. She was too busy complaining about her latest drama with coworkers or whatever dating app disaster she was currently navigating. My mother continued explaining how this arrangement would work. She said my sister needed to focus on getting her life together without the stress of finding a place, and since I was doing well financially, I should be happy to help family. She mentioned something about how I'd always been the stable one and how proud they were of my success, as if that somehow justified using me as a perpetual solution to my sister's problems. My sister added that she'd probably need the place for at least 6 months, maybe longer, depending on how things went with her new job prospect. She mentioned something about potentially having friends over and hoped I wouldn't be weird about it like last time. The audacity was breathtaking. I nodded along, making appropriate sounds of understanding. I asked a few practical questions about timing and logistics, playing my role perfectly. When would she be moving in? What did she need from me to make the transition smooth? My genuine curiosity about the details seemed to please them both. Mom said she'd help with the move this weekend. They'd already arranged for a truck and had started packing some of my sister's things. The plan was impressively thorough for something they'd apparently decided without consulting me. My sister mentioned she'd already told her friends about the new living situation and was excited about the extra space. As dinner wound down, I offered to help with dessert and coffee, playing the role of the accommodating brother and son. In the kitchen, I found myself almost laughing at the absurdity of the situation. In less than 48 hours, they were going to discover that their perfect plan had a rather significant flaw. I went home that night to my new apartment, a cozy place with better security and neighbors who actually followed lease agreements. I'd already changed my address with my bank, employer, and insurance companies. My mail was being forwarded. My internet was connected. I'd even bought new furniture to replace the stuff I'd left behind. Nothing expensive, just basic pieces that would serve their purpose. The next morning, I got a call from my sister asking if I'd be home later because she wanted to come by and measure some spaces for her furniture. I told her I had plans, but that she could swing by any time since she still had the spare key from her previous stay. She seemed pleased with this arrangement and mentioned she might bring a friend to help with measurements. Friday came and went without incident. I spent the evening at my new place, setting up my entertainment center and enjoying the peace and quiet. No unexpected visitors, no one eating my food, no drama seeping through the walls from someone else's poor life choices. Saturday morning, my phone started ringing early. The first call was from my sister, and she sounded confused rather than angry. She said she'd gone to the apartment to start moving some things and found it completely empty. She wondered if I'd been robbed and asked if she should call the police. I told her that wouldn't be necessary and that I'd explain everything when I saw her. She pressed for details, but I said it would be better to discuss in person. She seemed frustrated with my evasiveness, but agreed to wait for an explanation. The second call came about an hour later, this time from Mom. Her tone was significantly less confused and much more accusatory. She demanded to know what had happened to my apartment and why my sister had found it empty. She said they'd already rented the truck and had people lined up to help with the move. I suggested we all meet for lunch to discuss the situation properly. Something in my tone must have warned her that this wasn't going to be a simple misunderstanding because she agreed without her usual attempts to extract information immediately. We met at a neutral restaurant, the same place we'd had countless family discussions over the years. My sister arrived first, looking agitated and confused. Mom came in shortly after, wearing the expression she typically reserved for serious family interventions. I ordered my food calmly while they peppered me with questions about the apartment situation. Finally, I explained that I'd moved out the previous week and that the lease was no longer in my name. The silence that followed was profound. My sister was the first to find her voice. She asked how I could do this to her, especially when she'd already made plans and told people about the living arrangement. She said she'd been counting on this solution and didn't have backup options readily available. Mom's response was more strategic. She wanted to know when I'd made this decision and why I hadn't discussed it with the family first. She pointed out that they could have helped me find a solution that worked for everyone if I'd been upfront about my concerns. I explained that this wasn't a sudden decision, but rather the result of months of feeling taken advantage of. I mentioned the previous 6-month period when my sister had lived with me and how that had impacted my daily life and living situation. I talked about boundaries and mutual respect, concepts that seemed foreign to both of them. My sister interrupted to say that family was supposed to help each other, and that my behavior was selfish and vindictive. She accused me of deliberately sabotaging her plans and putting her in a difficult position without warning. I pointed out that the original plan to move her into my apartment had been announced to me as a done deal, not as a request or discussion. I reminded them that my feelings and preferences hadn't been considered when they'd made their arrangements. Mom tried to salvage the situation by suggesting we could work something out. Maybe I could co-sign for a place for my sister, or perhaps help with deposit money for a new apartment. She seemed to view this as a negotiation rather than a fundamental shift in family dynamics. I declined these alternative proposals politely but firmly. I explained that I was no longer available as the default solution to my sister's housing problems. She was an adult and needed to develop her own strategies for managing her living situation. The conversation continued for another hour, cycling through various stages of anger, bargaining, and eventual grudging acceptance. My sister accused me of being cruel and calculating. Mom expressed disappointment in what she saw as my lack of family loyalty. Throughout all of this, I remained calm and consistent. I wasn't angry or vindictive. I was simply done being taken for granted. The decision to move out and transfer the lease had been practical and necessary for my own well-being. Update 1. The immediate aftermath was about as dramatic as I'd expected. My sister spent the weekend frantically calling friends and looking at apartment listings. Mom tried to guilt-trip me through a series of text messages about family obligations and disappointment in my choices. By Monday, the practical reality of the situation had set in. My sister found a studio apartment that she could afford with her current income, though it was smaller and in a less convenient location than she'd hoped for. Mom offered to help with the deposit, which seemed fair since she'd been so invested in managing my sister's housing situation. The interesting part was how quickly the family dynamic shifted once I was no longer available as the automatic backup plan. My sister actually had to budget properly and make compromises based on her actual financial situation. Mom had to accept that her children were adults with their own lives and priorities. I helped my sister move into her new place, which seemed to surprise her. I explained that I had no problem supporting family members who were making genuine efforts to solve their own problems. What I wouldn't tolerate was being voluntold to sacrifice my comfort and stability for someone else's poor planning. Update 2. 3 weeks later, something unexpected happened. My sister called to apologize. She said living on her own had given her perspective on how much she'd relied on other people to solve her problems. She admitted that she'd taken advantage of my willingness to help and hadn't considered how her presence had affected my living situation. The apology seemed genuine, though I remained cautiously optimistic. People don't change overnight, and patterns of behavior that have been reinforced for years tend to resurface under pressure. Mom took longer to come around. She struggled with the idea that her family management style might need updating. She'd spent years orchestrating solutions to keep everyone happy and stable, and my refusal to participate in that system challenged her sense of control and purpose. Eventually, she admitted that she'd been treating me more like a resource than a person with my own needs and preferences. She said she'd gotten so used to my reliability that she'd forgotten I had the right to make my own choices about how to spend my time and money. Update 3. 6 months later, the family dynamics had stabilized into something much healthier. My sister was still in her studio apartment and had actually managed to keep it clean and pay her bills on time. She'd also started seeing a counselor to work on what she called her adulting skills, which was probably long overdue. Mom had backed off significantly on her family management activities. She still offered advice and support, but she'd learned to accept when her children declined her suggestions. Our family dinners became more relaxed and enjoyable once they weren't being used as strategy sessions for solving someone's latest crisis. I occasionally helped my sister with practical things like moving furniture or giving advice about lease negotiations, but these interactions were voluntary and mutual rather than obligatory and one-sided. She'd started reciprocating by helping me with projects and actually bringing something to contribute when she visited. The most satisfying part of the whole situation was realizing that my decision to prioritize my own well-being hadn't destroyed the family relationships. It had actually improved them. When people can't take you for granted, they're forced to appreciate your contributions and treat you with more respect. Looking back, I wish I'd set these boundaries years earlier. The fear of being seen as selfish had kept me trapped in a dynamic that wasn't good for anyone involved. My sister hadn't been learning important life skills because she always had me as a safety net. Mom hadn't been learning to respect her children's autonomy because I'd never challenged her management style. The apartment situation had been the perfect catalyst for change because it was concrete and immediate. There was no room for negotiation or compromise. Either I lived there or I didn't, and I'd chosen not to. The binary nature of the situation had forced everyone to adapt to new realities rather than trying to maintain the status quo. My new apartment remained a sanctuary where I could enjoy my own space without unexpected drama or intrusions. I'd learned the value of protecting my boundaries and the importance of making decisions based on what was best for my own mental health and stability. The family still got together regularly, but now it was because we wanted to spend time together, not because someone needed something from someone else. The relationships felt more genuine and sustainable without the underlying tension of unbalanced give and take. Sometimes the best way to help people is to stop enabling their dependence on you. My sister became more capable and self-reliant when she was forced to solve her own problems. Mom became more respectful of boundaries when she realized she couldn't simply assign people to solve each other's issues. As for me, I learned that being the responsible one doesn't mean being responsible for everyone else's problems. Taking care of yourself first isn't selfish, it's necessary. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for family members is refuse to participate in patterns that keep them from growing up. The whole experience taught me that revenge doesn't have to be vindictive or cruel. Sometimes the most effective revenge is simply refusing to be taken advantage of anymore and letting natural consequences unfold. My family had assumed I would always be available as their solution to my sister's problems. When that assumption proved incorrect, they were forced to find better ways of handling the situation. The beautiful part was that everyone ended up better off in the long run, even if the transition was uncomfortable. My sister developed important life skills. Mom learned to respect boundaries, and I reclaimed my right to make my own choices about how to live my life. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.